The first thing you need to understand is that this story should have never reached this point. It should have ended with clarity, with evidence that answered the only question that mattered. Who took the life of a young man whose future was just beginning? But instead, the moment you look closely at what happened the night Tyler Robinson was accused of committing a murder he insisted he had no part in, you realize you're stepping into a situation shaped by hesitation, assumptions, and a chain of decisions that continue to haunt everyone who has touched this case. From the first moment investigators arrived on the scene, the timeline felt fragile, almost as if every detail needed to be handled with care. But care was the very thing that seemed to slip away. As officers moved through a neighborhood that should have been peaceful, they collected pieces of information that raised more questions than answers. And in the center of it all was Tyler, a young man who on paper should never have been connected to the crime at all. Viewers, I want you to pay attention. Every detail matters here. Every minute, every direction someone walked, every statement that was made. Because when you line them up, when you place them beside the official story, the entire narrative starts to shift. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you can follow every update in this ongoing investigation. This is a case where even the smallest oversight can change the meaning of everything. At the heart of the tragedy was a young man named Charlie, who lost his life under circumstances that left the community stunned. People whispered that it didn't feel right, that something was missing. And as the hours turned into days, those whispers grew louder. Witnesses stepped forward with stories that didn't seem to line up with the version investigators were putting forward. And slowly, the focus of the blame settled on Tyler, a man with no history of violence, no known conflict with the victim, and a timeline that kept falling apart the more people tried to reconstruct it. There's a reason so many viewers reached out insisting something was off. The public wasn't reacting to drama. They were reacting to details that simply didn't cooperate with the official timeline. You see, multiple people reported that Tyler was somewhere else entirely when the incident took place. Others claimed they saw someone who didn't match his appearance running from the area moments after the shot was fired. Still, instead of expanding the search or acknowledging gaps that could shift the direction of the investigation, everything collapsed inward. The case narrowed around Tyler, as if the decision had already been made. And that raises a question this documentary must confront. Was the system looking for answers, or was it looking for closure? Those two things may sound similar, but when you see how events unfolded, the difference becomes painfully clear. Tyler's arrest was swift. Too swift for many watching from the outside. People commented online that the timing didn't make sense, that the evidence felt thin, and that nothing about the situation aligned with who Tyler was before that night. Even family members of the victim privately questioned whether things were moving too fast. They remember Tyler as someone quiet, someone more likely to avoid conflict than participate in it. Yet somehow, within hours, he became the prime suspect. And when the public asked why, the answers felt prepared rather than proven. As more documents surfaced, so did the inconsistencies. Phone data that didn't match the window investigators relied on. Distances that weren't physically possible to cover based on the timestamps. Surveillance footage that showed shadows and figures, but none confidently identified as Tyler. Every new detail felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, yet was still being forced into place. This is where the story begins to burden you emotionally, because once you recognize the cracks, you can't ignore them. You start to see the pressure, the urgency to solve the case quickly, overshadowing the need for accuracy. You sense how easily a community's grief can be redirected toward whoever seems convenient. And in that pressure, Tyler, a man who repeatedly said he wasn't even near the scene when the crime occurred, became the focus of a narrative that should have been questioned far sooner. Stay with me, because what comes next is crucial. As the investigation moved forward, more voices surfaced. Commentators, legal analysts, former detectives, and community members examined the timeline and reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. The facts didn't match the accusation. The more they uncovered, the more they wondered how Tyler ever became the prime target to begin with. What were investigators holding onto so tightly that they couldn't consider alternate possibilities? Why was the timeline so fragile that adjusting even a few minutes unraveled the entire case against him? And that leads to something even more troubling, the emotional aftermath. Tyler's family wasn't just pleading for justice, they were pleading for someone, anyone, to look at the full picture. They pointed out habits Tyler had, movements he made daily, small routines that made the state's version of events nearly impossible. But those details didn't matter. It was as if the system had already decided the outcome before the evidence had been fully examined. Think about that. Imagine being accused of taking someone's life while knowing every second of your day contradicts the claim. Imagine watching investigators overlook information that clears your name because acknowledging it would mean they admitted they moved too quickly. It's a weight that doesn't just pressure the accused, it pressures entire communities. And as the story spread, commentary exploded online. People asked the same questions you are probably asking right now. Why does the timeline feel incomplete? Why do the statements conflict? Why does so much information seem to lean away from Tyler, not toward him? You might feel unsettled hearing this, and you should. This isn't just about a crime. It's about a system that shapes the truth based on convenience, emotion, and sometimes fear. And Tyler's name became the symbol of a choice that may have been made too quickly. As we continue through this story, keep watching closely. Details that once seemed small will become significant. Gaps that were ignored will start to stand out, and the version of events that was once presented as certainty will begin to look less like a conclusion and more like a question that was never fully answered. If you want the next chapter of this investigation, make sure you're subscribed. What comes next has the potential to change how you see the entire case. And remember, Tyler Robinson could not have been the killer. The timing makes that clear. The unanswered questions make that clear. And the more we uncover, the more this story reveals a truth no one was prepared to face. This is only the beginning.
And as this story unfolds further, you begin to realize something unsettling. The closer you look, the more the pieces resist the version that was presented to the public, because nothing about that night fits neatly into the box investigators try to place it in. The emotions, the timing, the movement of people through the neighborhood, everything seems slightly off balance, slightly misaligned, as though the truth slipped through fingers that were too eager to claim certainty. Tyler's situation grows more disturbing when we examine the minutes leading up to the tragedy. Witness accounts placed him at a location nearly 15 minutes away from the crime scene, walking with someone who later confirmed the same story. There were timestamps, receipts, even casual observations from bystanders who recognized him. And yet, all of it seemed to vanish the moment authorities decided they had their suspect. Those statements were acknowledged, yes, but not embraced, as if acknowledging them too deeply would force the narrative in a direction they didn't want to follow. Think about that for a moment. A timeline that should have immediately exonerated a man was treated like an inconvenience instead of evidence. And that's where you begin to see the deeper cracks in this investigation. And here's the part that weighs on anyone who examines cases like this closely. When a system becomes more committed to protecting its decisions than seeking the truth, the consequences rarely stop with one person. They spread. They shape homes, families, relationships, futures. People grow up carrying the weight of closures that were never earned. As online communities started piecing together the timeline independently, they noticed the same discrepancies. People paused the footage, analyzed the timestamps, asked questions in comments and forums that no one in the official investigation seemed willing to address. Why did one officer claim Tyler fled the scene when the surveillance camera showed no such movement? Why were certain statements included in early reports but missing from later summaries? Why did witnesses who contradicted the official version receive less attention than those who aligned with it? These aren't small inconsistencies. These are the kinds of gaps that reshape the entire trajectory of a case. And viewers who follow true crime investigations know this pattern too well. When contradictions appear early and are ignored, they rarely disappear. They sit beneath every document, every interview, every press conference, silently eroding public trust. And here, with Tyler, that erosion became almost impossible to ignore. If you're still with me, you're exactly the kind of viewer this series is made for. Someone who understands that justice isn't about rushing toward whoever is close to the crime scene. It's about understanding the story behind every detail. So stay tuned, because the threads we're pulling now reach farther than most people realize. As Tyler sat in the interrogation room that night, officers tried to fit his words into their theory. But each time they pressed, each time they repeated the same question hoping his response would change, his answer remained steady. He wasn't there. He didn't see what happened. He didn't have a reason or even an opportunity to take Charlie's life. And what's remarkable, almost haunting, is that even in his exhaustion, even under pressure, his timeline never shifted, not once. Compare that to the timeline around the crime itself. The sound of the gunshot was logged at 10:43 p.m. A neighbor reported seeing someone sprinting past their porch around 10:41 p.m. The camera 2 blocks away recorded a blurred figure with a wide frame wearing clothing that did not resemble anything Tyler owned. Despite these details, investigators labeled the figure unidentified and moved forward as though the sighting carried no meaning at all. It's moments like this that force you to confront an uncomfortable truth. A case can be shaped not only by what is included, but by what is excluded. Details that don't cooperate with the chosen story often fade into the background, buried under the urgency of presenting answers. And when answers are valued over accuracy, people like Tyler become collateral damage. As this documentary progresses, you'll notice something important. The more you reconstruct the events surrounding Charlie's death, the more it becomes painfully obvious that the night was filled with movements that contradicted the allegation against Tyler. A car was heard speeding away moments after the shot, yet the make and model did not match any vehicle registered to him or his family. A witness described seeing someone with a distinct limp moving through the shadows, while Tyler was recorded earlier that day walking normally with no sign of injury. Even the angle of the shot raised questions about the height of the shooter, suggesting someone taller than Tyler. And yet, these details were treated as footnotes instead of warnings. As community members gathered at vigils and memorials, they mourned Charlie deeply. But even as grief filled the air, quiet conversations formed at the edges of the crowd. People whispered about how quickly the accusation came out, how certain individuals seemed relieved to have a suspect so soon, how some were afraid to question the decision publicly, fearing they would be accused of defending someone who had been labeled a murderer. It's a cycle that repeats too often. Silence becomes safer than truth, and doubt becomes something people carry privately rather than express openly. And yet, the questions continued. They appeared in comment sections, on late-night streams, in long discussions among people who noticed that the pieces didn't hold together. The timing, the distances, the statements that were brushed aside, the footage that didn't match the story investigators were telling. And above all, the absence of a clear motive, because even those closest to Charlie admitted that there was no known conflict, no tension, no disagreement between him and Tyler that could explain such a sudden act. Remember this as we move forward. Cases built on assumptions instead of evidence often leave shadows that refuse to fade. And as we peel back each layer, those shadows only grow longer. This is why it's vital for you to stay connected. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this case is evolving in real time, and what we uncover next could reshape everything you think you know about the night Charlie lost his life. There are interviews, reports, and first-hand accounts that have never been fully examined, and once we explore them, the truth will become even harder to ignore. But before we reach that point, there's something else you need to understand. Behind every misaligned timeline, behind every ignored witness statement, there are people, real people, who feel the weight of those decisions. Tyler's family wakes up every morning wondering how a system designed to protect the innocent could target someone who didn't fit the facts.
Charlie's family wonders whether they were told the full story, or whether the case was wrapped too quickly, too early to allow the truth to come through. And the community, once confident in the process, is left asking whether justice was served or merely performed. And we are only beginning to uncover the layers. As we continue this investigation, more inconsistencies will come to light. More witnesses, more overlooked details, more unanswered questions that sit like loose threads waiting to be pulled. The story isn't close to finished. It's expanding. And everything you hear from this point forward will bring you deeper into the heart of a case that demands accountability, truth, and the courage to question everything. We continue next.